They once claimed the church in France was on life support, that the land of saints and cathedrals had closed its heart to Christ. The great cathedrals, they said, were nothing more than hollow museums of a forgotten faith. But step inside, not as a tourist, but as a pilgrim. Stand before Notre Dame, not with a phone in your hand, but with awe in your chest. The bells don't just ring, they call. The air smells of incense. Silence isn't emptiness here, it's presence. Across France, something sacred is stirring. It's not noise, it's not a movement with slogans. It's a quiet return. Young people, once thought lost to secularism, are kneeling again, not for show, but from hunger. A hunger of the soul. Families are praying again. Rosaries echo in homes. Children are learning the stories of saints once buried in forgotten books. Barefoot pilgrims walk miles to shrines. Chants rise from chapels lit only by candles. And before the Eucharist, a hush falls. The kind that feels like heaven brushing earth. This isn't nostalgia. It's a reawakening. And what follows are 10 living signs that Catholicism in France isn't fading, it's rising. And the last one may take your breath away. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Sign 1. The unexpected return of the Latin Mass. In a country once dismissed as spiritually barren, where grand cathedrals were seen more as historical artifacts than houses of worship, an unlikely resurgence is taking shape. The traditional Latin Mass, once thought buried under layers of modernity, is now drawing crowds in growing numbers. But this revival isn't driven by nostalgia or elderly devotees longing for the past. It's the youth who are leading the charge. Across France, young Catholics under 40 are flocking to these ancient liturgies with a hunger the modern world cannot satisfy. These aren't thrill seekers chasing novelty. They're pilgrims of the soul, drawn not by spectacle, but by silence, reverence, and mystery. The Latin Mass offers no flashing screens or praise bands. It offers something far more radical: stillness. A reverent silence that wraps around the altar like a sacred mist, a language they may not translate word for word, yet it stirs something primal and eternal within them. Latin, gestures, incense, genuflection, all speak to a truth often forgotten in a fast-paced culture. God is not a casual acquaintance. He is King. For many, their first encounter with this ancient liturgy feels like stumbling into a realm untouched by time. Camille, a young convert, walked into her first Latin Mass and found herself weeping, not because of emotion, but because of presence. "It was like God had been waiting for me all along," she said. Stories like hers are multiplying across the country, testimonies not of entertainment, but of sacred encounter. Even dioceses that once viewed the Latin Mass with skepticism are adjusting course. Chapels in Paris, Lyon, and Toulon now overflow, sometimes standing room only. And on footpaths leading to pilgrimage sites like Chartres, young people walk for miles, rosaries in hand, songs on their lips, not as a protest, but as an offering. Their devotion isn't organized around ideology. It's grounded in thirst, a thirst for the holy, the eternal, the real. This movement doesn't make headlines, it doesn't demand attention. Yet if you listen closely, if you peer into the incense-thick air of a quiet French chapel, you'll hear it. Latin prayers whispered by lips that never learned the language, hearts that never expected to be called home. But home they are, mass by mass, soul by soul. Sign 2. When the journey becomes the witness. In a land once defined by its distance from faith, France now witnesses thousands of young people walking not away from belief, but toward it. The pilgrimage from Paris to Chartres, once considered a quaint religious tradition, has transformed into a powerful expression of spiritual hunger. Stretching over 3 days and more than 60 miles, this journey is no longer marked by cultural routine, but by a deep, personal longing for encounter with the sacred. What's striking is not just the number of pilgrims, but who they are. Teenagers, college students, young professionals, many under the age of 25, lacing up their boots and choosing prayer over distraction. They walk in silence, chant the rosary, sharing confession, and face rain, blisters, and exhaustion without complaint. These sacrifices aren't endured for show. Each footstep becomes a sacred offering. each mile a cry of the soul for meaning in a restless world. Along the way, makeshift altars are set up in forests and fields, and masses celebrated in open air with chalices raised to gray skies. There's no glamour, no convenience, only communion. The young aren't just reenacting the past, they're claiming it as their own. The pilgrimage becomes their statement of faith, one not shouted through microphones, but whispered through every aching step. And this movement is contagious. Pilgrims arrive not only from across France, but also from other nations, drawn by the authenticity of it all. The walk has even inspired similar faith journeys elsewhere in the world, echoing the same longing to reconnect with the divine through shared physical devotion. In a culture saturated with comfort and endless choice, the pilgrimage speaks of something radical: surrender, discipline, and the joy of belonging to a truth worth walking toward. Sign 3. The sacred festival lives again. For years, France's religious festivals were seen as little more than nostalgic stage pieces, dusty echoes of a Catholic past, paraded once a year for the elderly or for tourists seeking quaint spectacle. But something unexpected is happening across the French countryside and urban centers alike. These sacred festivals are no longer quiet relics. They are roaring back to life, and leading the way are not the aging faithful, but the young, the very generation many thought had abandoned the faith for good. From bustling cities to remote villages, the ancient processions once thought obsolete are being renewed with surprising vibrancy. The Feast of Corpus Christi, once dismissed as a medieval tradition out of step with the times, now moves through modern streets with fresh reverence. Priests carry the Blessed Sacrament beneath golden canopies. Clouds of incense drift upward. Children in white scatter petals, and all around, young families gather, not as spectators but as participants reclaiming something sacred. In regions like Brittany, festivals such as the Pardon de Sainte Anne, once fading into obscurity, are seeing a dramatic resurgence. The crowds are younger, livelier, and deeply intentional. It's not just about bringing kids along for a cultural outing, it's about handing down a legacy of faith. Parents come not only for their children, but because of them. They crave to pass on more than rules or values. They long to give their families a spiritual inheritance, something rooted in mystery, tradition, and eternal truth. These celebrations are no longer museum pieces. They are living, breathing encounters with the divine. You hear it in the hymns, smell it in the incense, and feel it in the reverent hush that falls over a crowd as the monstrance passes by. They're not performances. They're acts of belonging. In a culture of isolation and constant motion, these festivals offer a rhythm that reconnects families with the sacred, with community, and with time itself. Where once secularism stripped away the religious memory of a people, these revived festivals now stitch it back together. They spill from churches into streets, into neighborhoods, into the very heartbeat of French life, offering not nostalgia, but renewal. Not performance, but purpose. Sign 4. When the pews begin to fill again. After decades of spiritual decline and empty pews, something unexpected is unfolding in churches across France. They're filling up again, and not with tourists or nostalgic elders, but with a new generation searching for something real. The very youth once thought lost to secularism are now rediscovering the sacred, not through tradition handed down out of habit, but through a deep, personal hunger for truth and transcendence. Weekend masses that were once sparsely attended are now packed, often standing room only. Evening liturgies, especially during holy seasons like Lent, draw lines outside parish doors. What's most striking isn't just the volume of people returning, it's the spiritual intensity they bring. Confessionals are busy again, with young adults waiting patiently, not out of guilt, but out of a desire for grace. They come not for obligation, but for encounter. Many of these young Catholics arrive without family ties to the church. Some are converts, others reverts, and most are first-timers seeking something the world has failed to deliver: depth. Tired of noise, distraction, and fleeting pleasures, they turn instead to silence, sacrament, and mystery. For them, the Mass is not a routine, it's a lifeline. They're not looking for motivational speeches or trendy spiritual catchphrases. They want the real presence. They want salvation. While social media may have played a role in awakening curiosity, Through videos, podcasts, and influencers sharing faith stories, it is personal discipleship and sacramental life that truly anchor these young seekers. Many speak of priests, religious sisters, or catechists who guided them not with flashy methods, but with authenticity, compassion, and conviction. Their journeys often begin online, but they end in the pews, at the altar, in front of the tabernacle. This quiet movement isn't about reviving Catholicism as a cultural badge. It's about reclaiming it as a spiritual home. And in church after church across France, that home is no longer echoing with emptiness. It's alive with voices singing, kneeling, confessing, and receiving. The sacred spaces are no longer abandoned. They're being reborn, one soul at a time. Sign 5, the sacred returns in silence and simplicity. France's spiritual renewal isn't erupting through politics, media campaigns, or cultural revolutions. It's unfolding quietly, reverently, almost invisibly. It's taking shape in dimly lit chapels, whispered prayers, and the gentle rustling of rosary beads between young fingers. Across universities, train platforms, and busy dorm rooms, ancient Catholic devotions, once scoffed at as superstitious relics, are being embraced again by a generation desperate for something sacred and true. The rosary, for decades relegated to the pockets of grandmothers, is now found hanging from backpacks or tucked into jeans of college students. It's prayed in silence between classes, on commutes, or during nighttime walks, less out of obligation, more out of a longing to tether the soul to heaven in a world constantly pulling it apart. These are not grand religious gestures meant for show. They are deeply personal, profoundly simple acts of love, made quietly and often unnoticed, except by God. Eucharistic adoration, once associated with the faithful elderly, now draws teenagers and young adults who kneel in silence for hours, not to be seen, not for drama, but because they believe He is truly there. In the stillness, they find something the digital world cannot offer: presence. A presence that doesn't demand attention, but transforms it. Confession is another devotion finding new life. In an age obsessed with self-expression and self-justification, more and more young Catholics are choosing the confessional, not to check a religious box, but to be made whole. They aren't dragged there by guilt, they're drawn by grace. They know the culture tells them to follow their heart, but something deeper calls them to follow Christ. Even pilgrimages, once seen as the domain of elderly piety or religious tourism, are being reimagined. Groups of young people now journey on foot through forests, over hills, and into quiet rural shrines long forgotten by the modern world. They walk not to reenact history, but to be changed. They sing the psalms, carry wooden crosses, sleep under stars. What they seek isn't entertainment, it's transformation. This is not a trend. It's not a return to ritual for tradition's sake. It's a reawakening of the soul through discipline, beauty, and mystery. And it's happening one rosary, one confession, one adoration hour at a time. Sign 6. When men say yes again. In a country once labeled a spiritual wasteland, a quiet yet profound transformation is underway. France, long considered barren ground for priestly vocations, is now witnessing a stirring renewal from within. Young men, many from non-religious or secular backgrounds, are hearing a call that defies the noise of the world. It's not tradition for tradition's sake that draws them, but something deeper, an unshakable sense of purpose, rooted in surrender and the pursuit of holiness. Seminaries that once faced closure are now growing. One of the most striking examples is a community rooted in traditional liturgy and brotherly life, where the rhythm of daily prayer, communal living, and missionary fervor has become magnetic for a new generation. These seminaries aren't offering career paths. They're offering a life poured out, completely and without reserve. For many, the moment of clarity came in Eucharistic adoration. One young man described it as a voice that bypassed my ears and spoke straight to my soul. He knew instantly that his life belonged to Christ. These vocations are not just numbers on a report. They are personal, radical responses to divine love. And they're surfacing in places no one expected, from bustling cities to quiet villages, from university campuses to former atheists' hearts. In dioceses once burdened by controversy or apathy, ordinations have resumed, and formation programs are growing stronger. What once looked like an end is becoming a new beginning. Alongside this vocational revival, families across France are embracing faith-based homeschooling in increasing numbers. In the face of a culture that often confuses truth with opinion, parents are choosing to form their children not just in academics, but in identity, Catholic identity. These are homes where the catechism sits next to science books, where prayer is as routine as reading, and where children are taught not just what to believe, but why. Together, these movements, the surge in priestly vocations and the rise in domestic spiritual formation, are signs of something far more than statistical growth. They reflect a deeper longing to live for something eternal, to pass on a heritage of truth, and to raise a generation that recognizes God's voice and dares to answer it. Sign 7. The Mother returns to the battlefield. One of the most moving signs of France's spiritual reawakening is the unexpected and passionate resurgence of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. In a nation once known for its intellectual skepticism and proud rejection of religious tradition, Mary is quietly making her way back into hearts, especially among the young. From the crowded avenues of Paris to the hushed mountain chapels of La Salette, she is no longer viewed as a distant, decorative symbol of the past. She is once again being honored, sought, and followed as a powerful intercessor, a tender mother, and a spiritual warrior. In the heart of the capital, the miraculous metal chapel, once a quiet corner mostly visited by elderly pilgrims, now welcomes streams of students, engaged couples, and young professionals. They come not out of curiosity, but with conviction. They kneel with intention, fingers wrapped around rosaries, eyes fixed on the image of Mary, whispering prayers that ask for strength, clarity, healing, and grace. There's no spectacle here, just a steady rhythm of souls, rediscovering a mother they didn't realize they'd missed. High above, in the serene stillness of La Salette, where Mary wept for a world forgetting her son, another generation now climbs, not for the view, but for silence. They ascend with backpacks and Bibles, searching not for escape, but encounter. The air is thin, the space is sacred, and many leave changed. The rosary, once stereotyped as an accessory for the elderly, is now found wrapped around the wrists of athletes, looped through backpacks, tucked in glove compartments, or hanging discreetly from rearview mirrors. It's not superstition, it's strategy, a defense against the chaos of modern life. For many, each bead is a lifeline, a breath of peace in a world of noise, a shield of protection in a time of uncertainty. This new wave of Marian devotion is anything but passive. It's battle-tested. In Mary, young Catholics are finding not just comfort, but courage. They see her not as a distant statue, but as their queen, leading a quiet revolution of faith. Her mantle, once left behind in the rush to modernity, is being picked up again, not for show, but for shelter. She is mothering a generation back to Christ, one Hail Mary at a time. Sign 8. The streets are speaking again. In a country long celebrated as a citadel of secular thought, a quiet uprising is reshaping the spiritual landscape. Not within the stone walls of cathedrals, but out in the open, on street corners, in cafes, at festivals, and in train stations. France's Catholic revival isn't confined to the pulpit. It's now being led by young laypeople who are reclaiming the public square for Christ, with conviction, creativity, and compassion. At the heart of this movement is a nuncio, a vibrant network of lay missionaries spreading the gospel through everyday encounters. Born from a desire to bring Christ into the center of modern life, this group isn't waiting for people to come to church. They're bringing the church to them. Whether in Paris, Marseille, or Lyon, their outreach takes shape in courageous, unscripted conversations and public prayer that reintroduce faith not as an institution, but as a relationship. Their annual 10-day mission festival is more than an event. It's a spiritual boot camp. Young adults gather to pray, live in intentional community, and hit the streets in pairs, ready not to argue, but to invite. They approach strangers with humility and warmth, offering prayer, testimony, or simply listening. There's no pressure, no agenda, only the desire to love. That's what makes their witness magnetic. Their slogan, "France is a mission field again," speaks not of conquest, but of cultivation. Hearts being tilled and planted with hope. Their presence is challenging the deeply embedded cultural notion that religion is strictly private. In a society where faith is often reduced to whispers or confined to tradition, these young missionaries speak openly, confidently, and joyfully about Christ. They're not performing religion, they're living it, breathing it, sharing it in ways that feel human, fresh, and relevant. What's happening through this lay evangelization is not just a series of isolated encounters, it's a cultural shift. It's a generation saying, "We are the church too." They are stepping into a calling that doesn't require a collar or a pulpit, just a heart willing to be bold. In a world hungry for meaning but skeptical of doctrine, their lives have become the sermon. Spoken not from a stage but face to face, one conversation at a time. Sign 9. When beauty becomes a messenger. Amid France's spiritual revival, a cultural awakening is taking root in places few expected, on screens, stages, and soundboards. Once dismissed as irrelevant or artistically lifeless, Catholic arts and media are now pulsing with fresh creativity, speaking not only to the faithful, but also to a broader, often secular audience hungry for something meaningful. A new generation of French creators, filmmakers, musicians, designers, writers, and influencers is boldly rediscovering the sacred as inspiration. And they're doing it with a fusion of reverence and innovation. Across the country, Catholic storytellers are using modern tools to share eternal truths. Filmmakers are producing emotionally layered dramas that explore faith, doubt, beauty, and suffering with cinematic depth. Far from preaching, their work invites contemplation, bringing spiritual themes into the mainstream without sacrificing artistic quality. One film explores the tension between skepticism and mystical experience, resonating not only with believers, but with those asking life's deeper questions. Musicians are also breaking new ground, blending ancient Gregorian chant with contemporary rhythms and instrumentation. The result is music that transcends genre, a sonic bridge between heaven and earth. These soundscapes don't just entertain, they transport. YouTube channels and digital platforms now host French-language Catholic podcasts, mini-documentaries, and live Eucharistic adoration streams that regularly draw thousands, many of them young people who didn't grow up with the faith. Visual artists and illustrators are crafting sacred images in fresh styles, making saints and biblical scenes accessible to a generation that communicates in memes, reels, and emojis. Social media, once thought to be the enemy of deep spirituality, is now becoming a mission field where theology is shared through bite-sized reels, raw testimonies, and stylized meditations. It's evangelization by beauty, doctrinally grounded but emotionally rich, accessible yet profound. French youth, many raised with no formal religion, are scrolling past shallow content and finding something that speaks to the soul. They're engaging with faith not through dogma alone, but through artistry, where beauty becomes a pathway to belief. What once felt outdated now feels like discovery. The church, in their eyes, isn't a relic. It's a treasure chest, brimming with creativity, vision, and purpose. The gospel is no longer confined to pulpits or pews. It's being painted on digital canvases, whispered through headphones, and sung in concert halls. It moves now in pixels and poetry, testimony and tone, not because the message has changed, but because a new generation has found fresh ways to carry it, right into the heart of a culture rediscovering wonder. Sign 10. From Blood, New Life. In a quiet church in Normandy, during an ordinary weekday mass, an extraordinary witness was given. Father Jacques Hamel, an 85-year-old priest, was celebrating the Eucharist when two assailants stormed the sanctuary. In a moment that stunned the nation, they forced him to his knees and took his life in a brutal act of hatred. But what could have remained only a headline of horror became something more, a spark that ignited a deep spiritual stirring across France. His final words, defiant and full of faith, "Begone, Satan," echoed far beyond that parish, reverberating into the hearts of a generation. What followed wasn't a wave of fear, but a quiet, powerful movement of grace. Father Hamel's church, once a small local parish, transformed almost overnight into a pilgrimage site. Visitors now arrive not out of curiosity, but reverence. They come to kneel where he once stood, to pray where he once offered the sacrifice of the Mass, to ask for courage in their own walk of faith. His death did not silence the gospel, it amplified it. For many young Catholics, his martyrdom became a turning point. His unwavering fidelity, even in the face of evil, awakened something dormant, a hunger for real faith, the kind that costs something. Vocations have quietly surged in the wake of his sacrifice. Seminarians, newly inspired, name him as part of their story. Young adults who had drifted from the church now return with a seriousness they hadn't known before. They aren't just coming back, they're stepping in, committing, and living the faith with conviction. Father Hamel's legacy is not one of fear, but of fire. His blood, like that of martyrs throughout history, has become a seed, scattering not despair, but hope. In a culture often skeptical of religion's relevance, his death offered proof that the gospel is still worth living for and dying for. It spoke more clearly than any sermon could, that holiness is real, that courage is possible, and that love truly triumphs over hate. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. His story, carried quietly in the prayers and choices of everyday believers, continues to shape the Catholic revival in France. Not through noise, but through witness. Not in crowds, but in the silence of souls stirred by a priest who never sought attention, only to be faithful, even to the end.